New York, 7:05 in the evening, inside the Bellevue Hotel, where the biggest music fundraising gala of the year is taking place. Crystal lights cast a shimmering glow on elegant black tuxedos, figure-hugging evening gowns, and wine glasses gently swirling in the hands of the elite. Right in the middle of it all, a young black waitress places her tray of glasses onto the marble floor and walks straight toward the Steinway piano, sitting quietly in the corner of the room. No one called her, no one gave permission, but no one could stop her either. Just minutes ago, she had been publicly humiliated by one of the event's biggest donors. You were born to serve drinks, not to touch music. And now, that very man sits frozen in his seat, gripping the arms of his chair as the sound of her playing fills the room, leaving even the most powerful people in stunned silence, swept away by the beauty of the music. Her name is Amara. She is 27 years old. Black. A waitress at this hotel for the past 3 years. Day after day she carries drinks, clears tables, wipes down the counters. No one remembers her name, no one knows her past, and no one ever imagined that her fingers were once meant to play the piano. Amara grew up in the southern outskirts of the city, the kind of place no tourist map ever mentions. Her father left when she was still little. Her mother, a night shift nurse, worked endlessly to raise her. They lived in a cramped third-floor apartment with moldy walls and a drafty balcony, but it was always filled with music from an old radio sitting by the stove. She never had formal music training, but starting at age 6, Amara would tinker with the broken piano in the old church at the end of her street. Its lid was rotting and some keys no longer made a sound, but to her it was the only place in her poor little world where she felt like she had a voice. No lesson plans, no teachers. Just long afternoons with sunlight slanting through a cracked window as she sat quietly, her thin fingers gliding over the keys, eyes closed, imagining herself performing on a real stage with real lights and real applause. Her mother always said, "Music is the one thing nobody can take from you, unless you let it go yourself." Then came the illness. No warning. When Amara was 15, her mother was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. The cost of medication, hospital bills, everyday expenses. It all came crashing down like a flood. She had to quit her classes at the community center, where a teacher once told her she had gifted hands. She tucked her dreams away into a corner of a drawer and started taking on any work she could find, at a bakery, a convenience store, anywhere that would pay. By the age of 24, Amara landed a job at Bellevue, a luxury hotel where guests summoned staff with just a glance and belittled others by flaunting their names. She did not feel hurt. She was used to it, used to being invisible. Every day she wore a clean uniform, tied her hair neatly, and appeared in the lobby like part of the decor, silent, forgettable, out of the way. Sometimes she would pass the Steinway piano in the grand lobby, polished every morning, reserved only for guest performers, the kind of names who had graced the stage of Carnegie Hall or trained at elite music academies. She never touched it, not because she did not want to, but because she knew. In other people's eyes, she did not belong there. But every night after her shift, she would cross the street and slip into a narrow alley, where the old church still stood quiet among rusty poles and tangled wires. The broken piano was still there, and she still played it, just her. And the forgotten notes, slightly out of tune, dusty, but filled with raw longing. Her co-workers called her the quiet girl. Guests could not remember her name for more than 5 minutes. Some yelled at her to her face for bringing the wrong cocktail. Some sneered and called her sweetheart like it was an insult. She never reacted, just bowed her head, gently apologized. But at night, she sat alone at that old piano, letting her feelings spill through the keys, pouring out everything she could never say. in words. The last time Amara touched a real piano was 5 years ago. A famous artist had come to her neighborhood for a community workshop. He let a few people try the piano. She was not planning to sign up, but a friend pushed her forward. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the room went completely silent. The artist, mid-sip of water, looked up. She played a nameless piece, one she had written herself, inspired by the sound of her mother's heartbeat during those final restless nights. Afterward, he asked, "What school did you study at?" She just shook her head. "I never did." He looked at her for a long moment, said nothing else. But as she turned away, she knew he had just heard something no one else ever had in her entire life. From that day forward, she never played in front of anyone again, just by herself. Until that night, at the biggest music fundraising gala of the year, when she was unexpectedly assigned to the VIP section after another staff member called out sick. She was not excited, not nervous, she just knew she had a job to do. She stepped into the room filled with dazzling lights, extravagant clothes, and elegant laughter, and there was the Steinway in the corner, part of the fancy decor, powerful, untouchable. She did not stare. She knew she was not supposed to. She held her tray, walked the right path, nodded politely, smiled, until the musician took a break, leaving the current song unfinished. She passed by the piano, paused for a breath, her gaze still as air, and quietly said, "I used to play this one when I was little." And that was when the judgment began. The air in the room was still warm. Soft golden light continued to bathe the white tablecloths, but the expressions of a few nearby guests began to shift. A low male voice spoke behind her. "What did you say?" Amara froze. She did not expect her words to be heard, let alone by him. Harold Benson, the head of the Benson Music Academy Fund, the man who held the power to approve scholarships for art students across the state, and the lead sponsor of tonight's gala. She turned, slightly avoiding his eyes. "I just said this piece. I used to play it when I was a child." Harold tilted his head, not quite surprised, but with a trace of something close to mockery. He spoke loudly enough for the neighboring table to hear. "You used to play this piece." Amara nodded gently. She offered no explanation. She was not used to explaining herself. Harold gave her a quick glance from head to toe. The plain service uniform, the silver tray still balanced in her hand. Then he turned more fully toward his table companions, his voice even as if telling a light-hearted story. "How fascinating. I always thought Chopin's Nocturne required at least 8 years of formal training. Perhaps I was wrong." "Where did she study again?" Amara replied quietly, just loud enough to hear, "I never studied anywhere. I taught myself." He chuckled, softly, but it was clear. It was not the encouraging kind of laugh. A middle-aged woman set down her wine glass, narrowing her eyes in curiosity. A young man beside her chuckled under his breath, swirling his drink with a slow, lazy motion. Something thin, like an invisible thread, began to tighten in the air. No one said anything outright rude, but the tone in every gaze shifted. Not because she was a waitress, but because she had dared to say she had once played a piece they believed belonged only to the upper class. Harold nodded slowly, as if waiting for someone else to speak, but no one did. A few seconds later, he turned back to Amara. "You said you taught yourself," where on YouTube laughter burst out from the next table. A man in a dark brown tie covered his mouth, not out of courtesy, but to hide the grin spreading across his face. Amara remained still. She did not smile. She did not walk away. Refusing to retreat, that was the only thing she could do now. She said simply, "I learned by ear, and by memory. No one taught me, but I have played it. For many years." Harold set his wine glass down. His face grew serious, but his tone stayed light. Young lady art is not something anyone can just step into. We value talent, but above all, we value effort that has been shaped the right way. There are rules, standards, order. He held her gaze for a beat, then ended with a sentence that sounded soft, but hit harder than any slap. There are some places where no matter how hard you try, you were simply not born to belong. Someone nearby let out a light laugh. Someone else stayed silent. A few eyes quietly looked away. As for Amara, she did not respond. She looked down at the marble floor, still holding her tray. But her eyes did not lower. The first few laughs were hesitant, the kind of half-smiles people try to hide behind polite etiquette, unsure if they're allowed to laugh during an arts gala. But it only took one person to laugh loud enough, and the fragile silence cracked. An older man at the next table nudged his companion, nodded toward Amara, and sighed. Kids get bolder every year. Now even the staff claim to have played Chopin. The other shrugged. She's lucky if she can even count 4/4 time. They both laughed softly. Then their eyes moved on, as if her story had been no more than a passing amusement between wine pours. Amara stood there, back straight, tray steady. But something inside her began to crack, not because of Harold, not because of the laughter, but because of the way people looked at her. No one openly insulting her, yet every glance carried the same unspoken message. So it's your turn now. Who do you think you are? The room no longer felt like it did at first. Back then, Amara was just a server moving quietly between tables. But now, her silence, her refusal to react, made her stand out. And standing out without power is a quiet kind of crime. A young woman in a backless silver dress leaned toward her boyfriend and whispered, "She said she played that as a kid. What kid from a charity center?" The boyfriend shrugged, answered lazily, "Maybe just imagination. People like to dream." Amara heard it. It all came through like sound behind glass. Her eyes stayed forward, but her ears caught every word, every giggle, every slight twist of sarcasm. Each laugh landed like a tap, not sharp, but cracking something deep inside. One of Amara's co-workers serving a table behind her witnessed the whole thing. She turned away, did not dare step in, did not want to get pulled in. The isolation did not come from anyone pushing Amara out. It came from no one stepping toward her. In a room this crowded, sometimes the most painful thing is not being shouted at. It is the quiet stare that watches you being pushed down, and no one reaches out. Harold had turned back to his table but still sat angled slightly toward her, as if waiting to see what she would do next. Not to hear more, but to watch how a stray animal might flounder on a stage not made for it. Amara wanted to say something, not to argue, just to reclaim a sliver of dignity, a bit of humanity, but her throat tightened. She was not afraid. She was not weak. But she knew. Any words now would be twisted, chewed up, and thrown back as entertainment after the gala. So she chose silence. But silence was not weakness. It was the only choice left when every word had already been deemed unworthy of being heard. At the far end of the room, a national award-winning pianist was chatting with the Academy director. She had no idea who Amara was, but for a moment she caught her eyes and paused. She looked toward Harold, then toward the Steinway piano, sitting quietly in the corner, as if sensing that something genuine was being buried beneath all this polished laughter and expensive wine. Amid the whispers, the stolen glances, and the background music switching to a new piece, Amara remained still. Not because she did not know what to do, but because if she walked away now, she would forever be remembered as the girl who claimed she once played Chopin. And if she stayed, she had to wait. Wait for something. Something still forming. At that exact moment, the invited pianist returned to the stage. Amara stepped back, gently leaned aside, ready to return to her station. But then she paused again, just for a beat. Then she looked up. Her eyes passed over the piano, but this time did not stop there. The lights on stage shifted. The guest artist sat down at the Steinway, adjusted the bench, preparing to play again. She did not look at Amara, but somehow Amara felt it. If she walked away now, it would all end. Not just the party, but something inside her would close forever and never be allowed to open again. From the back, the hotel manager, who had been quietly observing, gave her a look, a small signal to return to her post. Another staff member began walking toward her, likely meant to take over or assist. But Amara did not move. She no longer heard voices. Everything blurred. Only the piano remained, and the distance from her worn shoes to its polished platform. She knew with absolute clarity, if she walked forward, the entire room would hold its breath, and if she failed, she would be crushed, not by others, but by the very music that once saved her. At 15, she had once stood at the gates of the Public Music Conservatory, the day of the scholarship auditions. Her mother was too weak to accompany her. She wore a white shirt her mother had just stitched up at the collar, clutching the handwritten music she had composed. But when she arrived and saw the other kids stepping out of private cars carrying professionally bound sheet music, wearing gloves to protect their fingers, warming up with short Bach phrases, she turned around. She did not dare walk in, and for years after, she never forgot that feeling. No one pushed her out, but no one needed her to step in either. Now, standing in this glittering hall, that feeling returned, only heavier, thicker, weighted by every laugh that had just echoed. Amara could return to the kitchen, go back to the staff area, change out of her uniform, tell herself it was just a moment, not my fault. She could avoid the stares. Some people would understand. A few co-workers might whisper, "You were treated so unfairly," and the moment would pass. But if she walked forward and sat down, she would be stepping into territory not meant for her, a place where even one wrong note would prove every bias correct. She knew the unspoken rules here. Not everyone who dares to rise gets respected. Only those who are recognized first are allowed to rise. And she had no backers, no title, no letters of recommendation, no academy, no stage. Only one thing: the memory of the keys beneath her fingers, and the music she never wrote down. No one forced her. No one called her name. She had only one person to answer to now, and that person was herself. Amara clenched her fingers gently. Set the tray down on the nearest table. Carefully, without a sound, she adjusted her shirt, not to look better, but to hold her head high. Then, she walked toward the piano. The first 3 steps felt as heavy as carrying 200 pounds, but each step after became lighter. Not because it got easier, but because she had already accepted she would see it through, no matter what happened. The hotel manager froze, ready to intervene, but the older gentleman, a highly respected artistic director seated in the front row, raised his hand, a small gesture, but one full of authority. "Let her," he said softly. That was all. The guest pianist, who had been preparing to play, noticed the shift. She stopped, looked at Amara. No expression, no reaction, just a gentle nod, a nod that meant, "If you are ready, go ahead." Amara stepped up to the piano. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but because the weight of this moment was far too big to call it just bravery. She did not ask for permission. She did not request to borrow the instrument. She did not make a speech. She simply sat down and placed her hands on the keys, as if she had been born for this very moment, in this very place. When Amara laid her fingers on the keys, there were still murmurs in the room. Some guests had not yet realized what was happening. A few assumed she was going to dust the piano, because hardly anyone dared to imagine she would play. But then, when her first finger pressed the key, everything fell silent. No applause, no introduction, no spotlight, just a melody flowing up from the depths of years long buried. Amara did not play a specific song. She did not follow any sheet music. She played the music that raised her, a blend of memory, a whisper of Chopin's quiet classical elegance, a touch of gospel her mother used to sing after night shifts, a hint of improvisation from that broken piano in the abandoned church. The sound was not perfect. Some notes were too soft, some slightly offbeat, but every note had a soul. That music, though not loud, made every other sound in the room feel unnecessary. A man by the door, who had already grabbed his coat ready to leave, stopped cold. A waitress across the room froze, wide-eyed glass in hand. A female cellist sitting in the corner tilted her head instinctively, trying to catch every detail of the unfolding melody. Harold, the man who once mocked her, still sat at the VIP table, his back stiff, his hand resting on his knee but fingers clenched slightly, as if trying to hold himself together. No one looked at him then, but if they had been close enough, they would have seen a flicker in his eyes. No one said a word. No one mentioned who she was. In that moment, titles, skin color, social status, all dissolved into nothing. Only one thing remained: the music, and the raw, piercing presence of a soul who had once been made invisible. Amara was not trying to show off her technique. She was not forcing herself to impress anyone. She did not need to, because what she played was not to convince. She played like she was talking to herself, to her memories, to the pain that had never been spoken aloud. That music did not just silence the room. It made everyone confront the human part inside themselves. The place where forgotten dreams once lived, where judgments were once thrown carelessly, where chances were once withheld just because of appearances. A few older guests leaned forward. A violinist nodded slowly, as if admitting, this is not an amateur. The distinguished guest, the one who had said let her, had remained silent the entire time. Now he tilted his head and placed a hand over his chest, a gesture no one demanded but one that meant the highest respect for someone who played from the heart. Amara kept going. The melody guided listeners as if through a wild field after a storm. At times unsure, at times tender, at times trembling, as though each drop of sound was finding its way home. At the end, she faded out. Not a sharp conclusion, but as if the music melted into the air like a story just finished, its echo still lingering. No one clapped, because no one wanted to break that moment. She stood up, no bow, no glance back. She simply left the bench. And in that instant, the powerful room fell silent once again. Not from shock, but because everyone realized they had just witnessed something real, a real human being, a talent that never asked permission to exist. Amara walked away. No one stopped her. No one called her back. But every step she left behind was a silence that settled into each person in that room. She passed by the VIP table, where Harold Benson, the powerful donor who had humiliated her, still sat. He said nothing, did not look at her, but his hand still gripped the chair. And in his eyes, something had just shattered. In the corner, the cellist placed her wine glass on the table. She had studied at Juilliard, performed on many grand stages, and had once believed she had seen it all. But what she just heard was not a performance. It was a soul being unchained. She followed Amara with her eyes, unblinking, trying to memorize that image. Not to share it online, but to remind herself there are talents that do not need a title to be true. A middle-aged man near the exit turned to his wife and asked quietly, "Where do you think she studied?" His wife did not answer. She only shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. Probably from a place that never taught her how to impress, only how to survive. The hotel manager, the one who had almost stepped in earlier, now stood frozen in place. He was the man who always thought of this black waitress as someone who worked fine, no complaints, but never remembered her name. Now, he saw something unfiltered. You can live around someone for years and still have no idea who they truly are. He did not know what to say, so he said nothing at all. One of the most demanding guests, known for insisting that everything meet royal standards, now sat with his head bowed, eyes on the swirl of red wine in his glass. His gaze settled on the ripple of color, and in that he saw himself. For years he had judged everything by label, by fame, by prestige, but not once, not even once, had he listened to music with just his heart. Amara never looked back. She walked straight toward the back of the stage, not quickly, not slowly. As if she had already made peace with it, she did not need to be asked to stay. She only needed to be heard. The pianist, who had given up her seat, stood, said nothing, but nodded, then walked over to the program director. "I think we do not need any more performances tonight. But there are still 3 guest artists. Trust me, no one wants to disturb what just happened." A few minutes later, the event ended earlier than planned. The host stepped onto the stage, his voice unsure but filled with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments when no more words are needed. Tonight we witnessed something that was not in the script, but perhaps it was what we needed most." Applause broke out, not loud, not forced, but real, from the heart. Harold did not stand. As the rest of the room began to rise from their seats, he remained seated. His eyes were distant, but his head was no longer held high like before. This was a man who had donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to prestigious music academies. A man who had hosted private concerts by world-class artists in his own mansion. But never, not once, had anyone made him feel ashamed of his own words the way that girl did. And in that final moment, when a staff member came by to collect the empty glasses, Harold looked up, for the first time that evening, and met the eyes of someone from a world different from his own. Not to apologize, not to explain, but simply to acknowledge he had just witnessed something that power could never buy. As Amara walked back into the staff quarters, voices from the main hall still echoed faintly behind her. Not noisy, not rushed, but with a quiet heaviness, like everyone was leaving the party, carrying something they could not quite name. She removed her apron, hung it carefully on the hook, washed her hands, dried them slowly, every motion deliberate, not out of pride or emotion, but almost like a respectful farewell to herself. No one spoke to her, no compliments, no questions, but the glances from her coworkers lingered, a mix of surprise, awkwardness, and caution, because everyone knew what just happened was not something that usually happens. In the kitchen, the head chef, a gruff Italian man known for his high standards, did not look at her. He just spoke almost absent-mindedly. "I used to play piano when I was a kid. Gave it up because my father didn't approve. I probably should have tried a little harder." He let out a dry laugh, then turned back to the simmering pot of soup. Amara said nothing. She did not know what to say, and maybe she did not need to. That night, Amara did not go straight home. She walked past the old church. The building had aged, but the stained glass windows still stood, the same windows that once colored the sunlight on her small hands as a child. She sat on the stone steps, silent. Her hands rested on her knees, still remembering the rhythm she had played that evening. Not glory, not illusion, just truth. She knew this would not make her famous overnight. It would not change her life. Tomorrow, she would still go to work, still wear the uniform, still be the black waitress in the eyes of many. But something had changed. The next day, in a meeting room at the conservatory, a quiet discussion began. Not part of any official agenda. Just a few artists from the gala sitting down together. One asked, "Who is she? I could not find her name in any records." Another replied, "I don't know either, but that music, it's still playing in my head. Should we do something?" Then, a pause. At the same time, in Harold Benson's private office, he sat alone. On his desk was the morning paper with a headline that read, "A fundraising gala," and a girl who was never invited to the stage. No name was mentioned, no photo, no PR. But the comments beneath, shared thousands of times, spoke of her like a symbol, the girl who did not need applause. Her music was a wake-up call. I used to think servers were just people who carry trays. Last night, I relearned the meaning of dignity. Harold folded the paper. He did not know what to write, but his hand opened a personal notebook, the one where he recorded exceptional cases for support. On the 14th blank line, he wrote, "No documents required, no recommendation letters. If she wants to study, help her." No one saw it, but it was the first time Harold ever wrote a note without conditions. A few days later, in a small coffee shop in Harlem, a place known for playing classical music on rotation, a new piece echoed from the old wall speakers. No one knew who uploaded it, but everyone grew quiet when they heard it. A little girl sitting with her mother stopped eating her sandwich, tilted her head, and asked Mom, "Why does the music sound sad but warm?" The mother said nothing, but her eyes softened. Some songs do not need to be written down. They plant themselves in others' hearts, growing quietly. Like an invitation, live honestly, even if no one sees you. Live because only you truly understand the song you carry inside. And Amara, she had no idea that night she had planted a seed in the hearts of those who once believed they were too small to change anything. 3 days passed. No one at the hotel brought up that evening again. No one said anything publicly, but the silence spoke volumes. From the lobby to the kitchen, from cleaning staff to senior managers, everything felt quieter, as if a melody still lingered in the air, and no one dared to press play again just yet. Amara kept working, still wore the cream-colored uniform, the black apron hair tied neatly. She did not talk about what had happened, did not ask questions, did not boast. She just did her job, like always. But this time, whenever she walked past the Steinway piano, the one in the corner of the grand lobby, the one that had held a room full of breathless silence, people stopped. Not out of fear, but out of respect. On Thursday night, the hotel welcomed a group of musicians from France, including a veteran pianist named Etienne Laval. He had performed in over 40 countries and was once called a storyteller through the keys. That afternoon, while the sound crew checked equipment in the lobby, Etienne sat down to test the piano. After just a few notes, he paused and asked, "Who played that piece during the gala?" The manager hesitated. "You mean?" Amara Etienne raised an eyebrow. "Her name is Amara. I would like to meet her." They found her in the prep room where staff rested between shifts. When she stepped out still with her usual quiet demeanor, Etienne stood. No handshake, no pleasantries. He simply said in a slow, deep voice, "I would like to hear you play one more time, not for anyone, just because I believe. There is something you did not finish saying in the last piece." Amara paused. She did not understand, was not sure she should say yes. Her whole life had taught her not to go beyond the line. But Etienne's eyes were not like those who commanded or bestowed favors. They were the eyes of someone who had once been ignored by the world, and knew exactly how much that hurt. Amara nodded, said nothing, just turned and walked back toward the lobby, where the Steinway still waited like a silent witness. That evening was not a formal performance, no reserved seating, no tickets, just an internal rehearsal. But people began to gather. Some staff pulled back the curtains. A kitchen assistant paused, chopping vegetables, washed her hands, and stepped into the hallway. A tourist couple passing by saw the small crowd near the piano and stopped to see what was happening. No one knew what was about to unfold, but everyone wanted to know. Amara sat down, no makeup, no glamorous dress, just warm overhead light falling on her neatly tied black hair, highlighting her cheekbones and gently closed eyes. Etienne sat in the front row unblinking. No one dared to cough, not a single sound. And then a new piece began. It was nothing like before, where the music held back years of pain. This time, Amara played with release. Each finger moved not to prove anything. She simply told the truth through sound. The melody had no name, but everyone felt something strange, as if they were hearing their own story told through someone else's hands. Fear, wounds, a memory of something nearly lost, all of it, vivid like a slow-motion film retold through echo. When she finished, Etienne did not clap. He just sat still, eyes closed. After a while, he opened them, looked straight at her, as if confirming without needing words, "You are someone who truly knows how to tell a story," without speaking. And then Etienne pulled a business card from his jacket pocket. He handed it to Amara and said just one sentence, "I am not offering a scholarship. I am offering a different stage. Not a promise, not a favor, but a door, opened by someone no one expected." Etienne's card stayed in the pocket of her jacket. A small, sturdy piece of paper with elegant gold edges, printed with his name and the title, Artistic Director of a prestigious international music festival in Paris. Amara held on to it all evening like it was something fragile and a little dangerous. She did not show it. She did not hide it. She simply held on, like a message not yet opened. That night, she sat alone in her tiny rented room where the walls were peeling and the pipes hissed quietly in the kitchen corner. She opened a drawer and pulled out something old, a thin music notebook once soaked by rain, the pages wrinkled and curled at the edges. It was her first handwritten sheet, notes she had picked up from the broken piano in that abandoned church. She was only 10 years old. The piano had cracked keys, loose strings, and the pedal had to be held down with a brick. But she went there every afternoon after school, sat alone, and listened. Listened to her own music out of tune, but real. Over time, she wrapped music up like a luxury, only daring to touch it when no one was watching. And now, this unexpected opportunity. But it was that very thing that made her afraid, not of failure, but of not being worthy. She imagined the audience in Paris, grand stages, spotlights, catching strands of hair, sound echoing through thousand-seat halls. She thought of the musicians trained from childhood, raised on solid technique and formal guidance. And what about her, a waitress who never graduated from a conservatory, never had a proper teacher? A black girl from a neighborhood no one talks about. She looked at her hands, fingers with small calluses worn not from hours of practice, but from carrying trays and wiping tables. She wondered, am I just dreaming too hard in the middle of a quiet night? Was all of this just a beautiful moment, nothing more? The next morning, Amara showed up for the early shift. She passed the Steinway piano like she did every day, but this time, no one was there. No stairs, no expectations, just the piano, still silent as if asking her, "Are you ready now?" She paused, her fingers brushed the lid, cold, smooth. Still the same piano, the one where her voice was finally heard, no words needed. And in that moment, she realized maybe the only person she ever needed to believe in her was herself. Not because of the card, not because of Etienne, not because of Harold, but because she had not yet played the full song of her own life. That evening, Amara sat in front of the mirror and looked into her own eyes. No makeup, no rehearsed lines, just those same eyes, the ones that once stared out through dusty stained glass windows. She picked up her phone and played the audio from the hotel performance, and in that music she heard something she had been hiding for years. A little girl who once believed that music was the only place where skin color circumstances and limits could not interfere. A little girl, still waiting to return. And for the first time in many years, Amara pulled out the card. She did not call, she just wrote an email. Short and honest, I am not sure I deserve this, but I am willing to try. Then she hit send. No expectations, no fantasies. Just like sending a message out into the universe, saying that if a door ever opens, she will step through it. 3 days later, a reply arrived. Just 2 lines, Paris, next month. Contact my assistant to schedule the audition. No long message, no thank you, no flattery. But it was enough. Amara read it again and again. She no longer felt confused the way she used to. There was only one rhythm now, quick but steady. For the first time in her life, she felt like she no longer had to hide her voice. That night, Amara decided to post the video from the hotel gala on her personal page. A page hardly anyone followed, except for a few old friends and a forgotten fan page. She did not write much, no long backstory, just 1-line white text on a black screen for those who have never been heard. Then she turned off her phone, expecting nothing. But the next morning, something she never imagined happened. A notification popped up, then 2, then 10. A well-known musician shared the video, then a major music magazine, then a cultural podcast. A hashtag began to spread across social media, Char Silent Talent. Within 48 hours, the video passed 1 million views. No one asked who she was. No one asked about her schooling. They just shared, from the heart. A young black woman with no title, no fame, sat down at a piano no one expected her to touch, and made the most powerful people in the room fall silent. Some called it unauthorized art. Others simply wrote, "Thank you for playing that piece like you were replaying my childhood." Amara did not reply to any comments. She just read, each word warming something inside her that had been frozen for years. That night in her little room, Amara pulled out her old headphones. She played the audio recording of her performance, soft but full. Every note was a piece of memory. The rainy afternoons in the old church, her mother's hand resting on her shoulder, and the quiet stare of someone who once believed she was not good enough. She did not know what Paris would be like. She did not know how the selection panel would look at her. But now she understood one thing. If a stage opened, she would step onto it, not to prove anything, but simply to be heard as herself. In that moment, she was no longer just a waitress, no longer the girl who kept her head down to avoid attention. Amara was a melody once forgotten, and now finally ready to be played to the world. The day Amara boarded the plane to Paris, it rained. She did not carry a fancy suitcase. She had no manager or entourage, just an old backpack, an economy class ticket, and a wrinkled sheet of handwritten music, the only thing she had kept from her childhood. She sat by the window watching raindrops gather like fragments of memory. Her first time leaving America. Her first time stepping away from all the well-worn paths of her past. As the plane lifted off the runway, she whispered to herself, "Do not be afraid. This is the moment to keep living." Paris was unlike any place Amara had ever been. French voices echoed at every street corner. The buildings were draped in ivy and bougainvillea, and across the Seine, the concert hall where she would perform Le Conservatoire Lumière. There was no audience for the audition, just a few people from the organizing team sitting in the front row, and Etienne with an unreadable expression. Amara sat down at the Steinway piano, her hands trembling slightly, but this time, she did not try to pretend she was confident. She played the same arrangement that once hushed the Bellevue ballroom, but slower, deeper, as if she were saying hello through her heart. When the final note faded, Etienne simply nodded, then pulled out his phone. "We will place you in the opening night." No further words were needed. The official concert drew hundreds of guests, critics, artists, media, all of them waiting for a name they had never heard. Amara stood backstage wearing a simple black dress. No glitter, no statement pieces, but her eyes were radiant. She stepped out, no introduction, no speech. She just sat and played. The piano began to sing like a warm breath in winter. She did not play to impress. She did not play to be accepted. She simply told her story through notes that needed no words. A young woman in the audience cried. A critic closed his notebook, and Etienne, for the first time that evening, stood. 3 days later, a major newspaper ran the headline, "The Waitress Who Silenced a Room and Woke Up a World." The hashtag, #GeoSilentTalent, returned. This time not as a trend, but as a movement. Street performers, public school music teachers, students without scholarships, all began sharing videos, photos, and messages I used to stay silent. Not anymore. A radio station replayed Amara's performance for an entire week. She was no longer alone. She did not become a celebrity. But something even more miraculous happened. She became a voice for thousands of buried musical dreams. A few days later, while waiting for her flight back to the US, a little girl approached her, brown-skinned, curly-haired, holding a tiny plastic keyboard. "You're the lady from the video, right?" Amara bent down and smiled. The girl whispered, "I want to play music like you." And for the first time after everything, Amara did not cry. She simply nodded. Then play, even if no one listens, even if no one gives you permission. Music is yours, and you are not alone. One quiet weekday afternoon, as the last light of the day spilled through the white curtain of her small apartment, Amara received a new email. The subject line was not flashy, not in all caps. It simply read, "Invitation to perform. Winter Gala." She opened it without thinking much. In recent days, her inbox had occasionally filled with small invites. Local organizations asking her to share her story, strangers thanking her for the Bellevue performance, or journalists requesting interviews. But this time felt different. The email was sent from an official address at the New York Conservatory of Music, the very place she had once approached 12 years ago, only to turn away because she did not feel she belonged. The invitation read, "We respectfully invite Ms. Amara McCoy to perform the opening piece at our annual Winter Gala, an evening honoring artists who have made powerful contributions to their communities." And at the bottom of the email, what made Amara freeze for a moment was the signature, Harold Benson, the wealthy man who had once humiliated her in front of hundreds, the man who dismissed her dreams in a single sentence, the man who made her hands shake her heart, stop just for saying, "I used to play that." Amara sat up straight, her heart racing, not from excitement, but confusion. The memories of that night, the mocking laughter, the condescending stares, the cold shoulders, rushed back like a wave. She remembered every word he said, and she remembered the moment he sat frozen after she finished playing. She reread the email, stopping at a small note at the bottom. This invitation was personally proposed by Mr. Harold Benson. If you accept, we will proceed with programming and press coordination. No apology, no justification. Just the invitation, formal, cold, and prestigious. Amara stood and walked to the window. Outside, the final rays of sunlight slipped behind the buildings, leaving the sky a quiet gray. She looked down at her hands. The same hands that once trembled from judgment ached from carrying trays and wiping tables. And also the same hands that created music powerful enough to silence a room full of influence. In her mind, a question echoed, should I say yes? Not because she had anything left to prove, not for fame, but for something unresolved. Can a person truly change? Can a system that once rejected you open its doors with honesty? She remembered Harold's eyes at the end of her performance. There was no arrogance, no anger, just something raw, as if in that moment even he had heard himself for the first time. Amara returned to her desk, opened her laptop, and typed a short reply, I accept. But I have one condition. I want to perform a piece I composed myself. No arrangements, no production, just a piano. She hit send. This was not about taking a chance. This was about claiming a space that always should have been hers. A new chapter was opening, and this time she was not walking away. The performance happened exactly 1 month later. No flashy posters, no phrases like viral sensation or breakout artist on the invitations. Just a simple card, winter gala, an evening of music and reflection. Amara entered backstage through the side door, the artist's entrance. She wore a simple black dress, hair neatly tied, no heavy makeup. Just herself, nothing more, nothing less. She had no manager with her, no crew, no one live streaming, no photographers hovering. Just an artist like any other. And maybe that was what made her stand out. She walked in as though she had never left the music world and never needed an introduction. The stage was not huge, just enough for a small string ensemble, a few dozen VIP seats, and a Steinway grand at the center gleaming under the lights. From the front row, Harold Benson sat quietly, hands clasped. No one called his name, no one looked his way, but in his eyes, something had changed. It was not pride. It was not shame. It was waiting. Amara stepped onto the stage. No intro, no drum roll, just the sound of her shoes touching the wooden floor. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath. The entire room held its breath with her. And then she began to play. Not a famous classical piece, not a grand arrangement, but a quiet melody, steady with the rhythm of her own heartbeat and breath. A song with no name, made from the stolen afternoons she once spent secretly practicing, from dreams of standing on a stage, from the nights her fingers went numb from extra shifts, but still found their way to the keys, just to remember she was alive. That music was the whisper of the unheard. Every note slipped through the air, soft yet full of weight, as if it was written not to impress, but to touch something that never had a name. The room was completely still. No phones, no cameras. No one dared to breathe too loudly. They simply listened, as if missing a single note would mean missing the most important thing in their lives. Amara was not playing to prove anything. She played to give music back to herself, untouched, unfiltered, without judgment, pity, or applause. When the piece ended, she did not rise immediately. She stayed seated, hands resting on the keys, as if listening to what still echoed inside her. No one clapped at first. That moment was quiet but beautiful. Like an apology, no one had the words to say. And then, a single clap. From a little girl sitting near the back. She clapped gently, her eyes wide, innocent, like she had just seen something magical. Then another person joined. Then the whole room. Not loud, not explosive, but wave after wave of applause, slow, reverent, as though everyone in that space knew they had just witnessed something sacred, a dream brought back to life. Amara bowed her head. No big smile, no dramatic gesture. Just a small nod, a thank you to those who truly listened. As she stepped off stage, someone gently tapped her shoulder. A woman's voice said, "Thank you. I quit piano when I was 17. Today, I am starting again." Amara turned, but the woman had already disappeared into the crowd. She would not remember her face, did not ask her name. But the words were proof music really can bring lost things back. And that night, she did not win an award. She was not on the front page the next morning. But in the hearts of those who heard her, she had left something no one could take away. Something real. 2 days later, Amara received an anonymous message. "Just a short sentence. I used to work at that hotel, and you made me believe I can start again." Then came an email from a young woman. "My mother never believed I could study music. Now she asks me to play your video every night." They were not grand praises. No one called her a genius, a breakthrough, or the Black Mozart. Just simple words from people who rarely have a voice. A man shared that he used to play cello, but gave it up after a teacher told him his hands were not made for classical music. After hearing Amara's performance, he opened his old case and played again. Not to perform, but to listen to himself. What was spreading across the internet was no longer just a video, it was a feeling. Covers began to appear, a little girl playing the melody on an old harmonica, a group of public school students remixing it into street jazz. Even a Detroit DJ sampled Amara's piano into a techno set, as a way to remember what woke me up. Amara did not try to control any of it. She just quietly read and closed her laptop, because what moved her most was not the praise. It was a message from an older woman. "I do not know your name, but I spent 40 years cleaning a theater, and I have never seen anyone dare to do what you did. I once dreamed of being a singer, but I was not white enough, not young enough, not rich enough. I thought that dream had died, but your piano made me realize it was only asleep." Amara read it again and again, then sat quietly for a long time at her tiny kitchen table, the same spot where her mother once left dinner after late shifts. She did not respond to anyone, did not post anything new. She just kept it all in her heart, like a quiet wave growing beneath the surface, because she knew a piece of music, if it speaks the truth, does not need to be played twice. It will find its way to those who need to hear it. And for her, this was no longer a solo journey. She was walking a new path, one where those once pushed to the edges were stepping back into the center of the stage. That weekend, Amara was invited to a public school on the south side of the city, a school where most students came from working-class immigrant or black families. There was no music room. The instruments were donated, some with broken strings. The digital drums worked through only one headphone. But the kids were excited. They crowded around a worn keyboard in a small, multi-purpose room, forming a tight circle. Amara had no prepared lesson. She brought no sheet music. She just sat down, nodded, and asked one simple question. "How many of you have ever thought music was not meant for you?" Almost every hand went up. A quiet girl asked, "Were you scared the first time you performed?" Amara smiled, then told them about the night at Bellevue. Not as a victory, but as a moment when she had to choose stay silent or speak in her own way. She spoke with honesty without decoration. About the fear of being laughed at, the way her hands trembled on the keys, and the hollow feeling of knowing that one wrong note could end everything. Then she played that same melody again, slower, rougher, less polished than in the video. But what made the room fall silent was not her technique. It was the emotion. The kids froze. like it was the first time someone really understood the invisible fear sitting in their hearts every day. At the end, a boy named Malik, curly hair, bright eyes, always sitting in the back, approached her. He held out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a song he had written himself, never shown to anyone. "I am not sure if it's good," he said, "but after today, I think it deserves to be heard." Amara took it gently, folded it with care. She said nothing about its quality. She just smiled and said, "Thank you for trusting me." That day she walked out of the school with that paper in her pocket, and something glowing quietly inside. Maybe the dream she thought had been broken by life was still alive, continuing on in someone else. No name, no permission, just someone willing to speak first. That night she sat alone by her window, watching the distant city lights flicker like notes floating in fog. In her hands were two notebooks, one from her childhood where she wrote her first music, and Malik's sheet sitting right beside it. Two generations, two beginnings. But the same reason, because neither of them wanted their voice to disappear. And she realized she was no longer alone, and that was the most beautiful thing music had ever given her. Amara began to receive invitations she had never imagined before, not from grand concert halls, but from small communities, a music class at a public library, a group of black teens putting on their first musical, a recovery center for veterans. There were no bright spotlights, no fancy invitations, but in each place were people who once believed their dreams had expired, and now, because of one brave piece of music, they gave themselves one more chance. She chose to show up at those places, quietly unannounced. At some events, only 8 people sat on folding chairs in an old meeting room with flickering lights. Sometimes they had to wait 3 hours for the generator to be fixed. Sometimes there was only one cheap electric keyboard and a speaker that crackled. But none of that mattered, because what she brought was not a showcase of talent. It was a reminder that every voice matters, no matter how small. One evening after a performance at a suburban community center, a little girl waited for her for a long time. She wore an old hoodie and held a notebook with folded corners. When Amara came out, the girl held out her notebook and whispered, "Can you sign this?" "My mom said, you're the first person I've ever seen in real life who used to be like me." Amara signed but did not write her name. She wrote one line. "Your voice is something the world needs to hear. Do not stay silent." That night, she did not sleep. She thought of those days behind the old church, playing a broken piano, believing no one would ever hear her. And now, those same notes were stitching lives back together. On a Monday morning, Amara received another invitation, this time from a national TV station. They wanted her to share her story live, the woman who silenced a room full of power. She declined, not out of fear, but because she had chosen a different path to speak, not to be seen, but to let others out there in silence know they are not invisible. She still worked part-time at a restaurant, not at Bellevue anymore. Whenever someone asked, "Why don't you perform full-time?" she just smiled, "Because I still need to be close to people like me." Once in a free music class, she volunteered to teach a student asked, "Do you think talent has to be recognized to be real?" Amara answered without hesitation, "No, talent only needs one thing, to not be thrown away." And in her heart, the music kept getting clearer. Not because it was being applauded, but because it was living on in others. Time passed. The video from that night was no longer trending. The hashtag silent talent slowly faded behind newer trends. But Amara did not care. She had never played music to be famous, and the reason she stepped forward that night was never to prove anything, but to finally allow herself to exist fully, completely, unapologetically. Now she lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn. It was not spacious, but it was filled with sunlight. On her desk sat a simple digital keyboard, and right beside it an old metal mailbox stuffed with handwritten letters from people she had never met. Every morning she picked one letter to read like a quiet ritual. Some letters came from a boy in foster care who was bullied for loving the piano. Some came from a middle-aged woman who said that after hearing Amara's music, she signed up for her first opera class ever. And then there were letters that said almost nothing, just a few scribbled music notes with a line underneath, "Thank you." One day she saw a flyer taped to a wall at the bus stop near her apartment. It showed a picture of her mid-performance head gently tilted as she played, and beneath it, a handwritten note read, "Keep playing," because someone out there still needs to hear it to stand back up. Amara stood there for a long while, not because she was surprised, but because she knew music had moved beyond her. It was no longer just her story. It had become the journey of forgotten dreams, finding their way back to one another. She kept playing, not in grand concert halls, but in places where people simply needed to be heard: nursing homes, mental health hospitals, vocational schools. One day she performed at a juvenile detention center where most of the eyes watching her had never been taught to trust in anything good. When her music started, a boy lowered his head and cried. Afterward, he handed her a torn piece of paper with one single line written on it. "This is the first time something did not yell at me." Moments like those, quiet, unseen, unreported, were the treasures Amara kept closest to her heart, because that was why she had started in the first place. Not to be on a stage, but to help someone, just one person, feel a little less alone. Someone once said, "Music does not change the world, but it changes people, and people will change the world." And for Amara, that had never felt more true. She used to believe that if her talent was never acknowledged, then maybe it did not matter. But now she understood real talent never needed applause to be real. It existed to heal, to open doors, to quietly remind someone that even if you walk into this life uninvited, you still have every right to speak. What about you? Have you ever stayed silent about a dream? Have you ever stepped back just because you thought you did not belong? Or maybe just once you wished someone would truly listen? If this video reaches you, leave a comment. Tell us what once made you go quiet, and what would you love to awaken in yourself? Do not forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it most. Because sometimes, one small story or one quiet melody is enough to rekindle a belief that someone thought was lost forever. And who knows, maybe you will be the next to step forward just like Amara did. Not needing an introduction, not waiting for permission, just brave enough to be exactly who you are in a world that has been waiting to hear your voice.